Hey guys, what's going on? We're going to talk about the term Balkanization. This term has been around for decades, but increasingly political commentators are talking about it in relation to the situation that we're in this country. They've been doing this for years, so it's nothing new. It's not like I'm the first person to talk about it, but I just wanted to go over what the term meant in case people didn't know what it meant. Some people, political commentators, just throw it around because they know what it means, but to someone who hasn't studied history, I'm a complete history nerd. I've known about this term since the 90s. So Balkanization means a fragmentation of a large region into smaller ones. These smaller regions usually are hostile or uncooperative with one another. Now, the reason why it's called Balkanization is because it did happen historically in the Balkan Peninsula, the Balkan region of Europe. It started with the Ottoman Empire, who took over all of these fragmented little city-states or smaller countries that don't exist anymore, and it all went under the Ottoman Empire. And when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, all of these regions now suddenly were free, and they broke up from the disintegrating empire into nation-states, city-states, whatever the situation may be. And more recently in history, it has been used to describe after the Yugoslavian Civil War, Yugoslavia broke up. It doesn't exist anymore, and now it is in, I believe, 5 different countries came of Yugoslavia: Bulgaria, Greece, Albania, Macedonia, and Serbia. All of these were historically, culturally, ethnically different groups that were all brought under this communist regime that ruled Yugoslavia. Then when it broke up, they're just like, fuck you, I don't want to be around you. There was a lot of ethnic conflict, a lot of ethnic cleansing and genocide during the Yugoslavian Civil War because these groups hate each other. They've hated each other for centuries. And when they were brought together under Yugoslavia, the only reason why they didn't go at each other was because Yugoslavia had a very strong military police state in which all dissident was suppressed, and the adherence was not to your cultural or ethnic heritage, it was adherence to the communist state. And once that was no more, there was nothing binding these people together. They reverted back to their old ways and started attacking each other, and eventually broke up into the states into the nations we see today. Now, of course, that's the short version of what happened. I mean, I can do a whole hour and a half video just talking about that because I'm a history nerd. But why are we talking about that now? What's that got to do with the situation in the United States now? Well, we're seeing the premonitions of what happened in Yugoslavia. We're seeing that now in the United States, where there are huge swaths of people, either geographically together, or culturally together, or politically together, or value-wise, moral-wise. We're not breaking up into ethnic states like Yugoslavia did, but we are breaking into two different nations under one right now. We live in 2 completely different realities. There's obviously different types of people, but there's 2 distinct types of people that are in this country living under the same government that want nothing to do with each other, and their values are completely opposite of each other. And we're seeing this tension with the hyper politicalization of everything, and how politics have become so divisive and violent often in this country. So instead of breaking up into ethnic or cultural states the way Yugoslavia did, people are thinking maybe we will break into 2 different types of political nations, like 2 United States. You can call it whatever you want, I don't care. Where one is what the far left wants: centralized government, big government, major spending, huge debt, foreign wars, no freedom of speech, no right to bear arms, just shred the Constitution, hyper-racist towards whites, almost an apartheid-like system in giving minorities so many benefits out the wazoo, etc., etc. I mean, I can go on and on, but you guys know what the far left wants. They say it every day. So one nation will form there. We don't know where it's going to form. We don't know where the lines will fall down, because unlike Yugoslavia, there are not ethnic and cultural lines of where people have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. We don't have that here. So the situation is not exactly the same, but there are similarities that we can compare to. The other country I guess you can call it regular America, regular conservative, libertarian, whatever, that wants small government, limited spending, balancing the budget, no foreign wars, champions the Constitution, so freedom of speech, right to bear arms, freedom to assemble, freedom of religion, no ethnic division in the application of the law, no special interests for minority groups. Everyone's treated equal. Everyone's treated on the value of their character and their decisions. Everyone's held accountable for their actions. There's no free pass because of your political persuasion. Now, obviously, there's lots of shades of gray in between these two, but that's basically where it falls down to. And then there's like little sections that are different, because there are a lot of Republicans, for example, that would love the big nanny, big government, left-leaning state, because rhinos are basically Democrats just 10 or 15 years ago. They love foreign wars. They love big spending. So it's not just we're going to divide into Democrat and Republican states. We're going to be driven into by our values and by our morals and what we believe is right and wrong. It overlaps somewhat with the Democrat and Republican positions, but not exactly. And there's some Democrats, I mean, there's a few out there that aren't completely insane. I know they're really hard to find, but they wouldn't be okay with the big government, radical left, big spending, left-leaning government. They would probably go towards the other one. Now, normies have no idea. They were like, are you crazy? The United States is going to break up? That will never happen. Can you imagine that happening here? Okay, every place that this happens always thinks, oh, it couldn't happen here before it happens here. And not just with Balkanization, with any big upheaval, with any big change to society, a war, a terrorist attack, something like COVID, everyone thinks, oh, that couldn't happen, that's crazy, right before it happens. There's a first time for everything. To think that the United States is uniquely different than all these other states that have existed for far longer, obviously, and have civil wars, they've broken up, they've added territory, they've lost territory, they've had civil wars, they've genocide, whatever. Pick any country in the old world, it's been around for thousands of years, and you will see that happening. But the thing is, that's my stomach growling. I gotta eat my second breakfast after this. I'm like a hobbit, I eat like 7 meals a day, if not more. Anyway, tangent. To think that we're uniquely different from those other countries, given the the ethnic situation is bad here too, with the hyper-racialization of everything, and the normalization of racism towards white people is reaching unprecedented levels, where it's being, excuse me, where it's being manifested into different, unwritten, of course, because then people would point it out as racist, but different legal proceedings because of your race, getting charges reduced because of your race, getting a free pass because of your race, or being condemned because of your race, being found guilty of something when you obviously didn't do it because of your race. If Derek Chauvin was black, they would never have done any of the things that they did. There would be no riots. He wouldn't be convicted of anything. But because he was white and did the exact same action that as a black police officer would do, but because he was white, he was treated completely and utterly differently. Now, this Balkanization may not happen, but the thing is, all signs point towards it going down that route. I mean, what is getting better in terms of relationships between the different races, or people's standard of living, or our rights? Are they being protected more? All standards of which you judge a society, we are getting worse at. I mean, take your pick. Again, we touch on topics that are outside the scope of this video because we can just talk for hours and hours and hours about different, let's say, stats that you judge a society or a country by. You know, standard of living, average age, average income. What is the average person? What commodities do they have? What are they able to do financially? Crime stats. All this thing, blah, 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 blah. Everything's getting worse in this country. It's not getting better. So all signs would point to eventually it's going to reach a point where these two different types of people hate each other so much that they want nothing to do with one another. They can't stand one another. They can't tolerate the other person existing because they are so been brainwashed by the media and by the schooling system that the other side is really annoying that I have to use this comparison all the time, but they're the ones who do it, that we're literally Hitler. We're literally white supremacist neo-Nazis who want to kill all minorities and usher in the Ku Klux Klan, an apartheid-like state. They are convinced that anyone who's non-left radical, Democrat is like that. So they can't tolerate us just existing and leave us alone. They know they have to come after us, after our rights, after our money, after our possessions, after our way of life, after our values, the way we raise our family, etc., 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 etc. And eventually, the people on the right are going to get too pissed off. They're like, okay, you're psychotic. There is nothing I can do to tell you, to convince you to stop attacking me, stop attacking my rights, stop attacking my property. You've already been brainwashed. You're way too down the rabbit hole. There's nothing I can do. So I just want to be away from you. I don't want to be in the same country as you. You can have this part of the country, and I can have this part of the country. Now that can happen peacefully, and ideally that would be ideal. I don't want to go through civil war. I don't want violence. I don't want people to get killed. At the same time, I don't want my rights to be violated. I don't want to live in squalor. I don't want to live in a country whose values and morals that are completely different than mine. Because I grew up in a country where mostly my values were upheld by most people in our institutions, in our schooling system. But so far has changed in just under 30 years that I don't recognize this country anymore. That's not an ethnic thing. It's a moral and judgment and values claim. That what our country, what our institutions, what the vast majority of people think is right, or they champion, or they advocate for, is totally opposite of what this country stands for. So I guess that was a quick rundown of what Balkanization means and how it pertains to the situation in this country right now, and how I think we're going to go down that route. Again, hopefully peacefully. I hope all the Democrats would say, okay, we're just going to take this part of the country, but my side, we want Florida because that's where I want to live. So we'll get parts of Florida and like Texas and like maybe the Southern Belt. I don't know how it's going to go down. I mean, we're not getting California, New York, obviously. We're not getting Maryland or Virginia. So that's fine. You guys can have all those shitty fucking states. And then you will see the vast difference in the outcomes of these states because of the different policies. And you can see the results of hyper leftist radical Democrat policies in action because they will control everything there. And you will see the results of right-leaning Republican, libertarian, whatever you want to call it, small government policies. You will see how much they will prosper and flourish, and everything will be better about these countries, about that country versus the Democrat one. It would be like North and South Korea, for crying out loud. I mean, the difference will be that stark. So that's all I got to say about that. And we'll see what happens. All signs point to that's what's going to happen. So I think it's important that people understand what that means because that might be in our future.